Life throws challenges our way, but how we respond is what truly matters. Finding strength in our relationships and recognizing our power can help us navigate through the storms. Welcome to Centered, Becoming Whole in a Chaotic World. This is a podcast about orientation, integration, and the lifelong work of becoming whole. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, a PhD exercise physiologist with a deep interest in the intersection of the physical and the spiritual. My guest is Sandi Griffin, a certified professional fitness coach, an accomplished IFBB International Women's Physique athlete, bodybuilding coach, speaker, and trainer with years of experience helping individuals find their way toward a more centered and fulfilling life. Her journey is marked by significant personal challenges, including navigating family dynamics and fostering resilience in her children. Through her experiences, Sandi has developed a deep understanding of what it means to be whole in a chaotic world. Well, Sandi, welcome to Centered, my new podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you back on. You have been a guest on all the podcasts multiple times, and just want to kind of pick your brain a little bit more on what it means to be centered and to become whole in this chaotic world. And so before we kind of get to your background, your story and everything, just take us back for a moment. Was there a point in your life when things began to clarify for you, when you started to see what really mattered in life?
Yeah, but I'm trying to think when that moment was.
It's a hard question.
Yeah, that's a really, wow. My first, what came to mind first was, what year was that? 2014, I think, and part of this story is just life experience. Part of it is just working through thought processes and things like that. So it's kind of a complicated answer, but 2014, my mother, who I had not had any communication with in many years, it had been 12 years since we had spoken, was visiting Germany and reached out. And this is typical behavior of a narcissistic parent. You know, they want everything to start from scratch, pretend like nothing ever happened. And the child is always the one having to deal with all of the stuff. Just let it go, and move on. And I thought, no, I'm going to get off this merry-go-round. And I wrote her a very thoughtful note, and I put a lot of intention into it to make sure that she knew that I loved her, she knew that I'd forgiven her, but we still need to talk about this stuff. And it never worked out because her behavior and her mindset has not changed. But that was the moment where it was 2014 was the year after our family had been through probably the most tumultuous year. Our family as a unit, all three of our children and ourselves, had gone through a horrible, horrible year. So 2014 was kind of like a fresh start for us. So I kind of approached this situation with that mindset. Like, if I can get through what we just went through in 2013, I can get through this. But it was a lot of recognizing why I was able to do that. And I think understanding forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. That I can set boundaries, that I can have an understanding that what happened to me isn't still happening to me, so I can react to things differently. The fact that our family was strong and we were stronger now than we were then. So I have the love of my children and my spouse that I really truly depend on. And just life experience that I'm unapologetic for setting boundaries, for saying the things that I feel, saying the things that I think, saying the things that I believe in. And it was, I think it was a culmination of all of those things. I finally had some healthy boundaries. I finally had a voice, I felt like, with some people in my life. And I recognized how strong we really were. So it's kind of I think it was that moment that I really discovered that I have some power in all of this, in this chaos, and all this chaos, where sometimes you don't have control over things. We were a military family, so we were dealing with a lot of those things that were not in our control. But what we did have control over was how we responded to that and how we stuck together. So I think I just that recognition that we had done a lot as a family, and that I had done a lot as a human, as a person, as a daughter, as a wife, as a mother. And I was like, huh.
You're one of the most centered people I know, I think. And I think that sounds like, I didn't know you prior to 2014. So, I don't think I did. Because we've known each other virtually for so long now. But, it sounds like that was a really important turning point for you. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is kind of how we are finding our way to becoming more and more centered. And one of the themes of this podcast is fragmentation. Where do you see people most divided and disoriented today? I know I'm throwing all the hard questions at you right off the bat.
I love them though. Sorry, I forgot to turn my phone off. I'm going to answer the word that really speaks to me more is divided. I think that's kind of that can go in a lot of different directions, but disorientated. I feel like we don't recognize, we are so broken from a very young age. There's not a person that walks this earth that hasn't experienced something in their childhood that shaped who they are as an adult, whether that's a physical trauma, an emotional trauma, or both. And I think we forget to revisit that child that got lost at that age and become kind of whole. And so we forget that we're beautiful. We get disillusioned that we can't do this and we can't do this. We have this fear of what if. And so we tend to stay where it's comfortable, but not necessarily healthy for us. So I think there's a lot of that disorganization in our mind that keeps us from recognizing who we are as a person as a whole, and our strengths and our beauty and our gifts and abilities and our talents and the love that we have, all that we have to offer. I think that's where people get lost.
And we're going to explore that journey a little bit more as we progress through this conversation today. But let's talk a little bit about kind of the integration in our lives as we have that fragmentation. How do we bring it back to being more centered? And I'm going to kind of align things to my SPIES model, my spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. And so beginning with the spiritual, what are some spiritual practices that are most formative in your life? And I know we've had you on the podcast talking about, some of this. So
yeah. I just had a conversation just a few hours ago, and it was a really interesting phrase, and I just love it. Spirituality is when you go to the mountaintop and you have this amazing experience that just touches your core, and you come down on the mountain, you're like, I need to live my life in this way. Religion is when you go to that mountaintop and you have this amazing experience that just touches you to the core, and you come back down the mountain, you're like, you need to live your life like this. And I really think that because for anybody that's watched our previous podcast together knows that I grew up in a conservative Lutheran church, and I was a worship leader, and I considered myself, very faithful and very spiritual. But through some experiences and just life and just growing and understanding and having, life experiences, so to speak, recognize that spirituality is something that is a very personal and very intimate thing that you and your power, your higher being, your creator, whoever that is, that's a very personal and intimate thing. And for me, spirituality is, I feel as a human, is just a basic human thing. I am called to love and serve people. I think if most of us did that, a lot of problems in the world would just kind of disappear.
It'd be amazing how different this world would be. And one of the episodes that we had you on when in the previous We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast was you and our friend Sam talking about our psilocybin journey. How does that fit into your spiritual integration?
I think it allows our mind to get out of being captured. We get captured by the things that we're inundated with, the social media, what we're supposed to do, what we're not supposed to do, what society says how we're supposed to live, the church telling you you're a sinner, this, that, and we get captured in these thought processes. I think plant medicine, and there's many purposes and reasons for them. I think it allows us to escape that cage for even just a brief moment and allow us to experience what true love is, what true, who our God is, who we are created to be. Because I think we forget that, for whatever faith you are, your creator created you in love and deeply loves you. And we need to understand that we are a beautiful being, but we get caged in these thought processes. And then once you have that understanding, I think, of who you truly are and what you're capable of doing, then that also gives you that deeper connection with your God, with your being, with your your spirituality, whether that's Mother Nature, whether that's Pachamama, whether that is, whoever that is in your life, in your spirit.
So we've originally connected really over our love of exercise and the physical side of things. So it'd be amiss in not asking you, what are some of the physical disciplines that anchor you personally, and how does that physical connection, that physical integration help you to be more anchored personally?
Well, I mean, just the science behind exercise, it's not a secret that it releases all kinds of amazing hormones in our body, to just help us sleep better, help us, with more energy and our mood and everything. In my personal life, nutrition is probably one of the most primary things that I'm very careful about what I put in my body. You can't expect your car to run on diesel if it's meant to have gasoline, and it's the same thing. Our bodies are meant to perform, but we need to make sure that we're giving it the fuel that it needs. Our gut health, because, the food you put in affects our gut, and our gut is actually the brain of the body. So, nutrition is probably the very first thing, making sure that I eat a nice variety of foods. I love my cheats too. I love my little treats. Deprivation is not part of being healthy. It's just moderation is part of being healthy. And then move your body. And that doesn't mean you have to lift a ton of iron. You don't have to be a gym bro. You don't have to be a power lifter. There's not a label that you need to fit under, but move your body in a way that gets your heart rate elevated, that makes you feel good. And as we age, the Aging Well podcast, as we age, our joints sometimes talk to us and be like, that's not what you should be doing. So just, listen to your body, but move it, get it doing things that elevate your heart rate, elevate your internal temperature, and things like that make you feel good, that help you sleep better. And it's really fun to do with friends. And we're communal beings. We're not meant to be alone. So if you can do it with somebody, that's even better. So
I like to exercise alone, though. I don't know if that makes me a bad person. I have a hard time going to the gym because being an exercise physiologist and having worked in the fitness industry for so long, it's just like, you see somebody doing something, you want to go over and correct them and help them. And it's just like, no, I got to get my stuff done here. So I do it at home. But
I think
I guess
people struggle with that accountability and consistency, and being deliberate about your consistency with exercise can be a challenge for people, and consistency is far more important than crushing it like once every 3 weeks. So if it means having an accountability partner, that's where that can come in handy too. So
moving on to the intellectual, how do you cultivate intellectual depth in this distracted world?
Podcasts is a great thing. I actually don't spend a lot of time in my car because I have the ability to work from home. But I think my husband loves to listen to podcasts. He is a nerd with podcasts about every topic you can possibly think of. I think if you stop looking for things to learn about, that's when it gets into a dangerous realm where it's not a good place for us to be. I enjoy learning from conversations. I love asking people hard questions. I like you do, like you did me just a minute ago. And like this morning, I had a 2.5 hour conversation with a gentleman I just met who's just fascinating and works with indigenous cultures and people in helping them through trauma and emotional regulation and everything. And it's just, I love to learn, but learning from other people and through their eyes and through their shoes and their experience, I think is even better for me.
I like that idea. And I think, when we approach intellect from, just a more transactional standpoint, like a lot of college students do, I don't think there's much value in it. But when we allow for our intellectual pursuits and our interactions with others and really everything we do to become more of a transformational intellectual engagement, I think that's where we really learn. And I think we learn more and more about how little we really know.
Yeah.
I think I always joke, having a PhD, that people who have a bachelor's have BS, people who have a master's, it's more shit, and PhDs are just piled higher and deeper. Or you can think of it as, somebody with a PhD has learned more and more about less and less until they know absolutely nothing, everything about absolutely nothing. And I think that's been the case for me in my intellectual pursuits, is that the more I've learned, the more I realize I have so much more to learn. And that's why I love these podcasts, because I just get humbled every time I have a guest on. I learn something new and I realize, I have to change my thinking. And it's that asymptote that we talk about, that is, we try and get to the asymptote of centeredness, of perfection. The more we learn, the more, you're getting closer to all knowledge, but you're also realizing how broad that breadth of knowledge is that you don't have. Yeah. And so I love these conversations. But I want you to be talking, not me here. So let's move on to emotional. I mean, how about emotional well-centeredness? How do you cultivate emotional maturity in your life?
That's been a lifelong process for me. So that's probably the one thing I struggle with truly the most, is the emotional regulation and centeredness. And I think it gets easier as I've gotten older. It's gotten much, much easier. But again, from that childhood trauma and the way that I was raised, it was, you didn't have a voice, you were yelled at, you were demeaned and everything. So I grew up with a bottle that you shake up and it explodes. You just keep pushing the stuff in, and then the last thing is somebody shakes you up and then off you go like a rocket ship. And that took a long time for me to learn how to communicate, first of all, and learn how to communicate appropriately. So yelling is not always an answer. Sometimes it is, but not usually. But I actually recognized it first with my children. I recognized that my emotional response to situations was affecting my children in an incredibly negative way. And I'm like, I've got to stop this. So just learning that for my emotions, I needed to find a better way to talk about them, ask for help, and have a safe place to just be able to you don't have to make it sound pretty. I think that was one of the things that I was too hard on myself. I needed to explain it in a way that just sounded lovely, or that was
right.
And no, it can be messy, it can be dirty, as long as you're in a safe place and a person loves you enough to let you do that. With regulating my emotions with other people's behavior, that was a whole different thing. And I had to learn that I'm not talking to this 40-something-year-old person in front of me, or 50-year-old, or however old they are. I'm talking to the 5 to probably 9-year-old version of that person, because they're reacting to the situation because they're still living in what happened to them. And then I had to look at myself and be like, am I acting like that 7-year-old child? Am I the damaged child that's reacting? And so that emotional regulation was really, probably, and still is, the most hardest thing for me, because if somebody doesn't take me seriously or doesn't treat me in the way that I feel like I have earned, or somebody questions me or questions my integrity, that immediately sets me off because of being told as a child, you're not good enough, you're not this. So I still react as that little 7-year-old. But I have to remember that no, I am this person. I do have this knowledge. I do have this credibility. I do have integrity. And I don't need to respond to them or react to them, excuse me. I learned appropriate responses. I'm not going to go off like the rocket. I'm going to ask clarifying questions. And I'm also going to ask them to rephrase what they just said. This is what I heard. Can you repeat that? But it's hard because we still have little pieces that remain, even though we work on ourselves constantly.
Yeah, I would agree that the emotional piece is the hardest. And for me, it wasn't so much damage done as, an 8 or 9-year-old child. It was really more mid-20s to mid-30s, the damage done in there. Because I grew up, Pam and I, when we were getting set to get married, went through this pre-marriage workshop. It was actually a couples workshop, but we did it as a kind of premarital counseling kind of thing. And one of the questions they asked was they wanted you to reflect back to your childhood and write down all of the negative talk you received. And I couldn't come up with any. I was like, my parents never talked down to me. I mean, and if anything, I felt like they thought I could do a lot more than I really could. And the only thing that came to mind was my mom, because they were divorced my freshman year in high school. And she would often say, "You're just like your father." And, I took that as being the only negative talk. And, I realized that I put so much pressure on myself for many years that, my dad was a person who would try and do amazing things and never really quite got the brass ring. And, I was seeing it as failure rather than success. And, seeing that my mother was putting me down. But in reality, I realized that it was much more painful for her to be around me because I was a constant reminder of her failed marriage and my father and everything. And it wasn't necessarily negative talk. It was just her dealing with the stuff that she had to deal with. And I was I was always labeled as a nice guy. I had coaches that would say, you got to get meaner. Remember my one wrestling coach, and he said this quite tongue-in-cheek. He didn't mean it intentionally, but he's like, you got to go home and kick the dog. You got to get meaner. And I realized that, people didn't want me to be a nice guy. And girls would, the reason they'd give for breaking up was you're too nice. And so, especially once I moved to New York, I just kind of picked up a much more aggressive stance and kind of my posture and everything. And then I realized as I got older, and especially having kids, that doesn't work, and I want to get back to that gentle self. I look at, one of the fruit of the Holy Spirit is being gentle, and it's like, I gave that up. I want that back. And so that was one of the things I really have had to and continue to have to work on. And so, I agree with you. Emotional is the hardest of all these to really work with.
Well, a really funny story that Griff and I totally laugh about now is because we've moved away from it. We've both grown. But, as a child, I remember my senior year of high school, I was a really good kid. I was a good kid. I never got less than a straight A. I got my first straight A report card in 5th grade, and I never went back. I had a 4.0 straight A report card every year through high school, even through my dad's death as a junior in high school. And I remember my senior year of high school, because still, this is only about a year after my dad died. And I had gone on vacation with a friend and my report card showed up, and we kind of knew what we got as grades, but we really didn't. And I graduated in the top whatever percent of my graduating class. So I knew that I had done really well, but you just want that piece of paper that says it. And so when my mom came and picked me up from the airport, and I said, "Hey, did my report card come in?" And she's like, "Yep." And I said, "Well, did I get straight A's?" And she's like, "Yeah, what'd you expect?" And I was like, you couldn't even, like, you couldn't even be proud of me. And it was always this competition. Like, if I did something great, she did it better. She did it under worse circumstances. So fast forward. So that's that. Like, I could never be good enough. No matter what I did, it was just not quite there. I was super proud, and then I fell short. So fast forward to Griff and I are in California, married. I can't remember if we had 2 or 3 children yet. And I was a stay-at-home mom. I wanted to raise our kids and everything. And being a military spouse, that afforded me the luxury of that. But I would make, dinner, and I would pack Griff's lunch every night. And I made homemade, I should say, I attempted to make homemade yeast rolls. Well, I didn't understand the process of bread yet, and how you have to let it rise and all the things. So my rolls kind of turned out more like hockey pucks. But I was still very proud, and I was putting so much love into packing this lunch, a good, healthy, home-cooked meal for my husband to take to work. And he comes in and he's like, "Well, these are a little dense," Instead of appreciating the love and care and concern that went into that meal, he's like, "These are a little dense, but thanks." And I took that container, that plastic container, and I threw it at him as he walked up the stairs to go get his stuff. Food exploded everywhere. And I'm like, that was my emotional regulation in my, mid-20s, late 20s, because I didn't understand that. I heard my mom's voice, and I didn't understand, like, no, he was grateful, but he was just making a simple comment. He wasn't trying to be mean or anything. But that's where I've come from. So in the next, 30 years past that, or 25 years past that, I think I've done a pretty decent job. I don't throw food at people anymore.
I'm glad Pam never throws food at me, because she would have thrown it at me many, many times, because I do the same thing. It's like comments, you don't mean it in a way that it's taken, and it gets taken that way. So my social question, what I'm going to go to today, kind of relates to us, because we had, how many years of a digital friendship before we actually met in person? And so in this age of having so many more digital relationships, and friendships, how do we move from a digital connection to a meaningful relationship?
Listening more than speaking. That's probably one of the biggest things I've really recognized about myself, was that I was doing a lot of talking, but I wasn't doing a lot of actual listening. I was listening to answer. And if you're going to have a real relationship with somebody, and this is in business and in personal life for me, if I'm going to have a relationship that's long lasting and actually meaningful and real, I need to listen. Because I can't meet my friend or a business partner or a colleague or a family member where they're at till I know where they're at. And I can't figure that out unless I listen. And not to respond, just to listen and learn.
That's good advice. And I think there's so many times that, whether it's me or somebody responding to me, but you post something, say, on social media, and maybe you're just venting, or maybe you didn't think about how you worded things a certain way, and somebody just rails into you because, they don't agree with you and you're this or that. And it's like, that wasn't my intent at all. So rather than saying, okay, you're totally off base here, it's like, what are you trying to say here? What's your point? And really, again, listening to people. And that goes to play whether we're digital or in person. But in this digital age, I think it's very important that we listen a lot more, and we can have meaningful relationships that are distant. You and I have only, met in person for really one weekend out of the last, would you figure it was 12, 15 years?
Yeah, close to 15, I think 14.
Yeah. Yeah, so it can be done.
Yeah.
You can have those digital relationships that turn into good, meaningful relationships. So
yeah. My big thing, and this is something not just in my personal life, but also I think what's made me successful as an entrepreneur and a business owner is really going after solid relationships with people that I work with, whether that's a friend or like I said, family member. This is kind of all widespread for me. For example, I'm putting together the expo again, and we've got some speaker requests coming in, and I don't know who this person is, but just to pick up the phone, something little like picking up the phone, making a phone call, and saying, "Thank you so much for being willing to contribute to something that's really important to me and I believe is important to our community. I would love to know a little bit more about you." That could be the first time in a long time that person's actually been appreciated, spoken to in a way with gratitude, and like somebody truly wants to know what they do and why they're passionate about that and who they are and what their story is that led them to that. Something so little, and like we don't think about those things. And so I really prefer, versus like text or email or whatever, a Zoom call where you can hear my voice, you can see my expression, you can tell that I'm actually listening to you, or to pick up a phone call and really have a conversation with somebody. I think that goes so much further than people think. And yes, it's not as convenient. Yes, it takes a little bit more time and effort. Yes, it's not always welcomed on the other end. That's okay. But for the most part, I think it's incredibly appreciated.
I think it's a lot easier now than it used to be. I mean, even just the phone call aspect. I mean, we have these phones on us constantly, so it's not like we have to put a quarter in the machine and, hope we have enough dimes and nickels to be able to talk to the person long enough. We can call from our cars. I mean, all I have to do is push a button on my steering wheel and say, "Call Sandi Griffin." And, if Siri hears me correctly, then we get connected and we have a conversation while I'm driving to work. I mean, it's not as hard for people anymore, but I think we're hesitant to do that. And I think too many people will go to the old texting as opposed to let's actually call somebody and actually hear a voice. I don't like texting. No. I much rather talk to somebody on the phone. I might text to say, "Hey, are you available for a phone call?" But I'd much rather talk to somebody on the phone.
Yeah. And my husband teases me all the time that I used a ton of exclamation points and I use a ton of emojis because I can't convey my feeling that I want to, words fall flat often, especially when you're trying to thank somebody or show your gratitude or appreciation. Words fall flat. But if you can hear how important this is to me with the tone of my voice, that goes so much further. And so it's all the exclamation points and all the hearts and all the smiley faces, to try to make sure that they grasp what I'm trying to communicate with them, or that I'm silly or goofy or whatever, so.
I think that's something I have to learn how to do. If I do like respond to a text message as I'm driving home from work, like if Pam will text me and I'll just respond to it. And, it gets no punctuation or any of that when you just kind of read it to them. And the AI doesn't recognize the inflection in your voice and the emotion. And then maybe I need to just say, and add 10, exclamation marks there and a smiley emoji and thumbs up and do all those kind of things, because I'll get, emails back. It's like, Pam responded heart, to your response, and that's a lot more emotional than thank you or, love you, whatever.
Yeah.
So good points there. And so at our deepest level, what do you believe human flourishing actually requires? For us to flourish as a human species, what do we need?
I'm going to go back to my first statement. If we approach life as our responsibility to love and serve, I think that's probably one of the most primary things. But that being said, you can't pour from an empty vessel. And so if you are truly going to be a servant and love your neighbor, you have to love yourself first. You have to make time for yourself. The world does not stop turning because we take a moment to go for a walk, to go for a hike, to do something special for ourselves, to take a weekend off and go explore another city, go learn something new. I think people think they're indispensable and the world's just going to collapse into a fiery ball of whatever if they take a moment for themselves. And I think parents are probably top of that category. They're like, my responsibility is to my children, my family. Yes, but you can't serve your child or your family if you're not taking care of you. So I think, and I know the words are very overused and very cliche, but self-care and just taking a moment to breathe, And that's why I love taking that opportunity to do psilocybin, not all the time, every once in a while, because it just allows me to be present with who I'm with, where I'm at, allows me to just enjoy the trees and look at the clouds. How often do we actually sit there and do that? Do you remember that day?
Oh, absolutely. I'll never forget that day. And anybody that really wants to go explore that with us, go back to, I forget what episode it was in the We Have a Spiritual Problem podcast, but just go back not too many episodes ago, and we shared our whole experience. And I don't even think I could articulate well enough in that experience just how life-changing it was.
Yeah. And it doesn't take mind-altering substances to do that. But just take a moment to, instead of eating lunch at your desk, just go outside, just be present for 10 minutes, do your workout, do something for yourself. And then I think if we look at people as our friends, not our enemies, and try to listen more, listen to a story, figure out why they are the way they are, I think a lot of barriers fall down real quick.
I was going to ask you what daily or weekly practices keep you centered, but I think you kind of answered those. Are there anything you would want to add to what you've just talked about? I mean, obviously you're not doing psilocybin daily, but...
No. A couple times a year, to be very clear. Yeah. No, I can't think of really anything to add.
We know from the conversation you exercise and do all those types of things.
Going back to your last question, though, one of the things that I really have made a dedicated effort to, because I would hope that somebody would do this for me, is just check in with folks every once in a while. If someone's going through a rough time, or if you haven't talked to somebody, or if you've been thinking about somebody and you don't know why, give them a call, send them a text, whatever. Yeah. But that's really been fruitful for me to, I reached out to a friend. I haven't talked to her in 6 years, and we picked up like we just left off. And how many times do we think, oh, I need to call that person, but we never do. I think human connection is so important.
Have you ever read the book, the Celestine Prophecies?
I've not.
That book talks about that idea that if somebody comes to your mind, they're coming to your mind for a reason, and that you should act on it. Mm-hmm. And so Pam and I refer to those moments as Celestine prophecy moments, that somebody comes to mind and you decide to, give them a call or text or something like that. And invariably, it always ends up, it's like, oh, I was thinking about you, or, I'm going through this right now and I'm so glad you called me. And it's just like the universe sends you that message for a reason, and you need to act on it. And I think if we did that more often, where we just simply had a thought about somebody, act on it, whether it's even just a quick text, an email, or actually calling them, it can go a long way, because chances are they need it.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that came to mind just in being centered in general is, I think we worry so much about our financial stability, which that's obviously very important, but we miss out on so many experiences because we're working. And I think it was a Simon Sinek and Trevor Noah conversation about friendship. How often do we cancel friends meetings because of work? How often do we cancel work meetings because a friend is in need? And I think again, the world's not going to stop turning because you take a couple hours off, or you take a day, or even take a week off. But how much more are our lives enriched by having conversation, or traveling and having an experience, or just taking a moment to be quiet? You can always make more money. You can't get time back. And I don't want to waste any more of my life on things that are going to be meaningless after I'm gone. I want to touch people's lives. I want to leave a legacy with my family. I want to leave a legacy with my friends and people that were in my life. But money is not going to matter when I'm gone. I mean, of course, we want to live a comfortable life. I'm not saying we don't, but we've prioritized experiences over chasing the dollar. I'm not going to work an 8-hour week. I'm just not. So, and I think that grounds you a little bit more too. So when you talk to other people and you see the hardships other people are going through, one, it gives you a little bit more gratitude for where you're at. And like, don't miss out on moments. Don't miss out on moments with people, with your kids, with, opportunities that you turn down. You're going to regret it. I don't want to die with any regrets. I want to go out, rock star party.
Yeah, I was talking with somebody recently, if you are a fan of Stephen Covey and his works, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about, kind of his quadrant where it's important and versus urgent. And you have things that are urgent and important, and then things that are not urgent and not important. And that's how we prioritize our times. But there's a guy, I'm going to forget his name now, Vader. I can't remember Vaden. I'm totally drawing a blank on his first name. But he wrote a book, Productive Procrastination. And he takes Covey's work a step further and talks about its significance. What is the most significant stuff that we're doing? Because things can be important and urgent, but it's not significant. It's, you're going to miss a kid's play at school because, of some urgent emergency at work that's very important. I think of the movie Elf. It's one of my favorite movies because my dad's just very briefly in the Central Park scene. You can see him in the back. It's one of the many movies that he did where he was an extra. But, there's the scene in there where James Caan's character has to basically just stand up to his boss and say, no, then I'll quit because my son needs me right now. Mm-hmm. And what he was dealing with was an urgent, important situation, but his son at that moment was the more important, the more significant thing. And, whatever happened from that business meeting, that's going to happen, and good or bad, time's going to pass. But that significance for how he responded to his son was something that was going to live a lifetime, and it's going to affect not only his son, but, grandkids, great grandkids, and so on. Yeah. And so significance is something we tend to ignore. And, there's a lot of important stuff that's going to happen in our lives that we can forget about. It's going to be in the past and it's not going to be important, but significant stuff is going to be important.
Yeah. That was one of the things when Griff got ready to retire from the Air Force that, everybody works on the initials of the letters after their name, the alphabet soup after their name, or their rank, the stars on their shoulder. But Griff always asks people, like, when they start getting into that mindset, do you remember who General Franklin was? And they're like, no, who's that? And he was a significant moment, and it's another story, but a very significant person. But he chose to do the right thing and lost his career. But that was an example that he uses. You don't leave a legacy in your job. Nobody's going to remember you. There's very few people that, in 100 years, is anybody going to know Simon Sinek? Probably not. He's a really great guy, a lot of wealth of knowledge, but the people that he's touched are going to remember him. I don't have any initials behind my name, and I'm cool with that, but I guarantee you I've touched people's lives. That's what I want to do. I know that I have a great relationship with my children. Nobody's going to remember how much money you made, what your title was, what your position was, what your rank was. But the people that you either treated very poorly or that you made a significant impact in their life, that's how you leave a legacy. So do what's important. Do what's going to matter. So, and it took me a long time to set boundaries with, being an entrepreneur, because I don't have a staff, it's all me. And I've got all these to-do lists because that's how my brain works. But as soon as I see my husband's car start to park in the garage, this gets shut down. This is not as important as he is, because I wouldn't have any of this without him. So my time needs to be spent with him.
So what warning signs tell you that you're becoming fragmented? Maybe you don't become fragmented. You're just so solid.
No, have you met me, Jeff? I can tell when I start, I can feel when I ramp up. I can feel when I'm not exercising because my body doesn't. I can tell when I've not eaten good or I've missed meals because I get too focused on this stuff, at my desk. When I haven't, I need those dates with my friends. I need that downtime with my friends, just to be goofy and have fun. So I guess I can feel my anxiety rising a little bit. I can feel when I'm not in a good place. It's more of a feeling, not something that's externally apparent.
So do you believe human life is moving towards something? And if so, what? Get deep here.
Where'd you come up with these questions? I don't know that I believe we're moving towards something, but I think our whole life is an awakening, because we're programmed, the things we're taught, the things we see, the things we're told to do, being in, organized anything. And once you start to realize, again, when your mind is open to who you are, what you're capable of, your beauty, your strength, then all of that external programming starts falling off, and I think you really get to discover who you are and who you want to be and how you're going to serve other people, how you're going to touch lives. I hope that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And so what belief must people let go of in order to flourish?
Any belief that's not true. Belief that you're not worthy, that you're not this, you're not that, or you are this or you are that. Any label that's been placed on you, get rid of all that garbage. Accept who you are. Accept the amazing human that you are and what you have to offer this world. I think we get stuck. We get stuck with labels and what we should do and how we should do it, and get rid of that. It's such a simple answer. It kind of sounds silly saying it out loud, actually. But I think sometimes the simple answers are like the most apparent, and we just ignore them.
Yeah, I think it's hard for us. We tend to accept who we think we are, and we tend to dismiss who we're meant to be. And we think that we are what other people say we are rather than what we know deep down inside to be. And that, to me, is where we start flourishing. Once we find, and somebody mentioned to me recently a quote from Mark Twain where he said, there's two important times in our life: the time that we're born and the time when we finally realize why we were born. And I'm misquoting that, but that's my paraphrasing of it. That we need to recognize that we have a purpose, and a big P purpose is what I like to call it, for being here. So I like to end every conversation in this new version of the podcast with the same question. So if someone listening right now feels scattered or fragmented, and so many people I'm sure do, what is one step they can take this week, this moment, to begin becoming more centered? The weight of the world is in your hands.
That's a really great question, Jeff. One thing they can do. And again, it's kind of simple and basic, but I think just taking a few minutes to write down a list of just positive things, whether that's a list of things you are grateful for, a list of gratitude, a list of the things that you have to offer, like the really amazing things about you. Because I think if we can recognize our strengths and our beauty and our what we have, that's so unique to us that nobody else has that we can share with other people, and also recognize the things in our life that are grounded, like relationships, the love that we have for our family. We have a meal to eat that's going to sustain us for another day. Those simple little things, if we can ground ourselves in those positive, simple things, then that kind of shuts off some of the noise of all that discombobulation that's always trying to inundate us. And just take a moment to find your little comfortable, safe sanctuary of your life, who you are and what you have, and where you're at, and recognize those positive things. I think even just writing down 2 or 3 things, even it can be that simple, can at least shut off those voices and that noise for a brief moment of time to give you a little bit of peace. And then hopefully you can start expanding on those things with some of the other things we talked about earlier.
I love it. And Sandi, thanks for joining me today and just having this conversation, helping me to move a bit more closer to being centered, and hopefully our viewers and listeners as well. This is a journey that I think that we're all on, and I hope that this conversation we're opening up with this kind of new podcast, which is still kind of an old podcast, but this new path toward formation is something we'll all join on together and just start moving toward that azimuth of a life that's just going to make us that much more better as a society. And so I love you as a friend. I love having the conversations that we're able to have. And sometimes just having these podcasts is an excuse to kind of have a conversation with you. And so thanks for joining me, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, Jeff.